We're on the bottom of DAF Chaf Gimel Amid Beis. We just have some catch-up to do. So the Gemara had talked about this very confusing permutation of when you have the simplest permutation is where one man gives kiddushin to one woman, but he's not sure which sister it was. He's not sure whether he gave kiddushin to Rachel or to Leah, and then he dies. So the halacha is that if he leaves over two brothers, so then the first brother can only do chalitza, but once the first brother has done chalitza and has removed the zika, either off of one of the two sisters, so either he's done chalitza with the true Yevama, in which case her sister is free to get married to the other brother, or he's done something meaningless to someone who's not married at all to his deceased brother, in which case the other brother can do actual yibum. But basically what the Gemara had said is that you can actually remove the zika by the first brother's chalitza, so that by the time the sister, who was acho zekukaso temporarily, wants to marry the other brother, that's fine because she's no longer stigmatized with acho zekukaso because the first brother did chalitza, remove that zika. Okay, so now let's talk about this issue when we talk about how it gets a little bit more complicated. The Mishnah had extended it further, which really is just an extension by logic of the first case. What happens if you have two guys, not related at all? Reuven and Moshe were the names that we gave them yesterday, and Reuven is mesupek whether he gave kiddushin to Rachel or Leah. Moshe is mesupek whether he gave kiddushin to Rachel or Leah. Both Reuven and Moshe pass away. Reuven has two surviving brothers. Moshe has two surviving brothers. So what the Mishnah had said is, let each first brother of Reuven and Moshe respectively do chalitza, and let the second brother of each do yibum to the other woman. In other words, if Rachel got chalitza from Reuven's family, then the brother from Moshe's family can do yibum to Rachel, and vice versa. Okay, that's what the Mishnah had said. So the Gemara's question is: look, you're essentially telling me the same thing. That once you do chalitza with the one sister, you remove any problem of zika to the sister, and the other brother can do yibum. So why do you need that case? Hasu lamali. That's the Gemara's question. Hainu hach. It's really just a continuation of the same logical sequence that we've been discussing before. So the Gemara's answer is mahu detema ligzor dilma miyabim below chalitza kamash malan. Because you might have thought that a person, that in this situation, when we're dealing with two deceased men, and each one leaves over two brothers, and both families there's going to be yibum involved, there's a greater potential for confusion, so that maybe the first brothers may think that they can do yibum as well, since there's going to be yibum from both families. I'll be the one that does yibum, and the first brother will do yibum instead of doing chalitza, and therefore we should be gozer that no, everyone has to do chalitza instead of letting only one brother do chalitza and the other brother letting him do yibum. Let everyone do chalitza to avoid confusion. Kamash malan, that we still, even in this greater permutation of this suffix, we allow the second brother to do yibum, provided that the first brother did chalitza from each side. So now the Gemara is going to ask another basic question. We learned before, the Gemara's question is, this halacha seems to be inconsistent with something that we learned before. Our famous case of the four brothers, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Reuven and Shimon are married to two sisters, Rachel and Leah. Reuven and Shimon both die, and Rachel and Leah fall to yibum to the two surviving brothers, Levi and Yehuda. The Mishnah had taught us, at least according to the Chachamim, that Levi and Yehuda each respectively cannot do yibum. Levi has to do chalitza to one, and Yehuda does chalitza to the other. Right? Basically each woman needs chalitza. And the reason why we had said it is because we have this principle of achos zekukaso, that if someone is the sister of a woman that you have zika with, she's permanently usher to you. You're not allowed to wait for the zika to fall off and then do yibum with her. According to what we just learned, in a situation where there are these two sisters that fall potentially to Yibum, and you're worried that one of them is Acho Zukukaso, just let one brother do Yibum, do rather Chalitza with one. He removes the Zika, and then the sister is permitted to do Yibum with. Why don't we say the same thing in that classic case of the four brothers? Let's say the two surviving brothers are Levi and Yehuda. Let Levi do Chalitza with one. He'll remove the stigma of Acho Zukuka, so there's no more Zika to that woman, and then he can do Chalitza to the other, and then he can do Yibum, Yehuda can do Yibum to the other sister. So the Gemara says it's not going to work. You know why it's not going to work? Because I'll tell you why. Hachi hashta hasam. Ilaman da Amar yesh zika, vilaman da Amar asal levatel mitzvahs yevamim, asal levatel mitzvahs yevamim. It's very, very simple. The difference is that in the case of the four brothers, you definitely have zika coming from two different households. You know for sure that each one of these sisters has a zika. Now, if you paskin yesh zika in this case, remember we had this whole machlokus yesh zika or ein zika. If you paskin in this case that zika is so strong to prohibit the sister because zika is like a pseudo marriage, and therefore the sister of the woman that I'm pseudo married to is usher to me, then both Rachel is usher to me because she's Leah's sister, Leah is usher to me because she's Rachel's sister, and that's going to be true for both Levi and Yehuda because each one of them is a vadai zukuka. In our case over here, that's not the case. In our case over here, only one of these girls has actual Zika. One of these sisters is actually Zika. The other one is not a Yevama at all. And since the other one is not a Yevama at all, you're only dealing with the case of a suffix. I'm not sure. Maybe this woman that is standing in front of me, maybe she's the Yevama, and maybe she's not the Yevama. Maybe she's the sister of a woman that previously there was a Zika that my brother already did Chalitza with her. So in a case of suffix, it's easier for us to remove Zika from a woman to allow us to let you marry her sister than in a case of when there's Vadai Zika from both sisters. Just because Levi did Chalitza to one sister doesn't, fine. So it's true that maybe the Zika is removed, but I still have Zika with this woman, and she's a woman that previously was the sister of another woman that I had Zika with. So therefore the Chachamim can't remove her Zika as easily than in a case of our Mishnah where there's only a suffix whether there's Zika, an Achos Zukukas or not. And there was another opinion why we didn't allow either Levi or Yehuda to do Yibum. If you hold Ein Zika, do you remember the reason why we said that even after Levi, the first brother, does Chalitza, we don't allow Yehuda to do Yibum? We had said that the reason is because if we allowed Levi to do Yibum, right, then what would happen if Yehuda dies before Yehuda has a chance to do Yibum or Chalitza? Then this would essentially preclude Levi from doing Yibum or Chalitza to the other sister. And therefore you're being mavatel the opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah with the other Yevama. And that's why Chazal forbade in general doing any kind of Yibum either for the first brother or for the second brother. So therefore, if that's the case, says the Gemara, that's unique to that situation over there when there's Vadai Zika, when there's for sure Zika from each sister. But hacha kol chad v'chad emor didei kamisram yolei. But over here, since you're only dealing with the suffix acho zukukaso, each of the brothers could say, the one that is presented to me is for sure the Yevama. And therefore, you have the case where Ruvain dies, he leaves over two brothers, Shimon and Levi. Shimon does Chalitza with the first one. He could argue, I did the actual mitzvah of Chalitza with the actual Yevama, I removed the Zika. But Levi could also say, this is not necessarily acho zukukaso. This woman Kataka be the Yevama. What my brother did previously, my brother Shimon did previously, is completely inconsequential because that woman was not a Yevama at all. And therefore it's only a suffix whether there's an Achos Zukukaso problem over here. And that's why we're more liberal over here, and we allow the second brother to go ahead and do Yibum. Okay, I hope I explained it well. I'm sorry if I didn't. Kadmu v'kansu ein motziin b'chulei. Now the last thing that we learned in the Mishnah is, and this is consistent with what we learned all along, even though only the second brother is allowed to do Yibum, if the first brother does Yibum as well, then after the fact, that the second brother does yibum with the other sister, we say b'di'evid, we allow both of the sisters to be married to the two surviving brothers. So Tani Shila va'afilu shneim kohanim. And this is true even if both of these men are kohanim. Now what do we see from there? So we know that for sure, vadai chad minayu vadai chalutza nasiv daharusas hanachri chalutza hi me'achad mishnei achav kirigatani kadmu shnayim v'choltzu. Now we learned in the Mishnah that we're talking about a case where two brothers from one decedent go ahead and do yibum after two brothers from the other decedent had given the two girls chalitza. So we know for sure that one of these girls is a chalutza. One of the girls was never a Yevamos, so therefore the chalitza that was done to her is completely inconsequential. We're not sure which one of these girls is a chalutza, but yet you're telling me the halacha is from the Braisa that even if both of the brothers from the second decedent go ahead and do yibum, even if they're kohanim, they're allowed to stay married to these women b'di'evid. What about the fact that one of these kohanim is married to a chalutza? It's my taima. The Gemara says chalutza de rabbanani. V'safek chalutza lo gazru b'hu rabbanan. The answer is very simple, because the isser for a kohen to marry a chalutza is only rabbinic in nature. The Torah only prohibits a divorcee to marry a kohen. The rabbis extended that to a chalutza, and they said because a chalutza is like a divorcee, she's not allowed to marry a kohen. But since it's only rabbinic, and since it's only a suffix, which sister is the chalutza, it's a suffix de rabbanan, so we can be mekel. So the Gemara says, "V'chalutza de rabbanan." Since when is the law of chalutza rabbinic? V'hatanya gerusha ainli ela gerusha chalutza minayin tamalom or v'isha. So the Gemara says, if you look in the pasuk carefully, there's a brisa that says when it talks about the prohibition for a kohen to marry a gerusha, it says, "Isha zona v'chalala lo yikachu," that a kohen may not marry a zona or a chalala, two kinds of tainted women, and then it says v'isha grusha me'isha lo yikachu, and a woman that is divorced from her husband they may not take. The word v'isha is completely superfluous because the pasuk already started with the word v'isha. Why the word v'isha a second time? To include a chalutza is also prohibited to a kohen. You see that it's midioraisa then. So the Gemara says no. Midirabanan hu ukras machda ba'almahu. Really the law that a kohen may not marry a chalutza is only rabbinic. What about the pasuk? The pasuk is an asmachta. It's only a mnemonic reminder of a rabbinic law. The next Mishnah. Mitzvah begadol liyabim v'im kadam hakatan zacha. Now we're going to spend some time with this halacha. It is a mitzvah for the eldest brother to do yibum. However, even though that's the lichatchila mitzvah, if however a younger brother jumps the gun and does yibum without giving the opportunity for the older brother to do it, his yibum b'di'evid is still a valid yibum, and the woman is married to the younger brother. Tanu Rabbanan. So now we're going to expound on this based on the pasuk. And what's going to be interesting over here is we're going to see that Chazal actually completely take this pasuk out of its simple context. The Brisa says, "V'hayaha bechor," it shall be the firstborn that she shall give birth to shall be called upon the name of his brother. Now, that's what the Torah says. It shall be that the firstborn that this Yevamos shall give birth to after having done Yibum shall be called on the name of his brother, and so that his name not be blotted out from Israel. Now, the simple understanding of that pasuk, if you were to read that in a chumash, if you were to read it in a Bible, the simple understanding is, after the mitzvah of Yibum is done, this woman will become pregnant from the Yavam, she'll have a firstborn son, and you'll give the firstborn son the name of the deceased brother. And that way, you give permanence or continuity to the deceased brother's life. That's the simple understanding. But Chazal completely reinterpreted that pasuk, and they said that the words "V'hayaha bechor" does not refer to the child of the Yevama, but it refers to the Yavam himself. Mikan shemitzvah begadol liyabim. This teaches me that it is a mitzvah for the eldest of the brothers to do yibum. Now, again, that's a complete removal of the simple understanding of the text. Asher teleid, that she shall give birth. What is that coming to exclude? Prat la'ailonis. That's more with the simple pshat. It says that she shall give birth. This means to the exclusion of an infertile woman, which means, according to this brisa, if a woman is an islandess, she does not fall for yibum. And yakum al shem achiv lenachala, that he shall arise in the place of his brother, once again is not referring to the child, but rather is referring to the Yavam himself. And that teaches me that the Yavam is entitled to inherit whatever the deceased brother's assets were. Which means if the brother is deceased and he leaves over an estate, it is not divided equally among the brothers, but rather the Yavam takes the entire estate. Ata omer lenachala o ena elo l'shem Yosef Karan oso Yosef Yochanan Karan oso Yochanan. Maybe that's not the correct interpretation, says the Brisa. Maybe what the pasuk means literally is that whatever child this Yevama gives birth to shall be given the same name as the deceased brother. And therefore, if his name was Yosef, call this baby Yosef, and if the man's name was Yochanan, call the baby Yochanan. So the Gemara says, I'll prove to you that that's not the case using a Gezerah Shava. Ne'emar kan yakum al shem achiv, v'ne'emar lahalan al shem achayim yikaru b'nachalasam. Ma shem ha'omer lahalan nachala, av shem ha'omer kan l'nachala. That we know that when Yaakov was giving Ephraim and Menachem, each one his separate portion, his separate tribal status, he said that each one of these boys, Ephraim and Menashe, will be called with the name of their brethren according to their inheritance. Which means that even though Ephraim and Menashe are children of Yosef, they shall be treated as the same status of all of the brothers of Yosef vis-a-vis inheritance. Just like the word shame is in reference to inheritance in that pasuk, so too the word shame, the name of the person, is a reference to inheritance. And then finally, the last part of the pasuk is v'lo yimacheh shemo, that his name shall not be blotted out from Israel. Prat lisriz sheshmo machoy. This comes to exclude when the deceased brother was infertile to begin with. If he was a eunuch, the halacha is that if the deceased brother was a eunuch to begin with, then there's no mitzvah of yibum because he already was blotted out. He was already incapable of having children, and therefore there's no mitzvah of yibum because the whole purpose of yibum is to build up a house that he could have built had he survived. But since this fellow could not have built it anyway, because he was a sris, there's no mitzvah.
What do you do when there's a subject of infertility, man or woman?
It's a good question. I don't know. You have to look in Shulchan Aruch. But in any, probably Safik Deraisa L'Chumer, I don't know. Or go according to Chazaka, I'm not sure. But in any event, we had seen a previous Gemara having to do with a Psuadak and a Krushavka, where the halacha was a bit different. It could be there's a difference between a Psuadaka and a Sris. It could also be that there's a machlokus between the previous Bryce and the Bryce that we're learning today. But in any event, now we're going to analyze this Bryce. Amar Rava, Afal Gav de Bechol HaTorah Kula in Mirka Yotzem Yidei Pshuto Hacha Asoig Zereshava Afikte Mipashte Legamre. And this is really a reiteration of what I told you earlier. Even though normally, when you have a pasuk that reads a certain way according to the pshat, you always have to find meaning in the pshat. Here, Chazal completely take it out of its simple meaning. Even though the simple meaning of the pasuk is you're supposed to give the firstborn child of the Yevama the name of the deceased brother, here that's clearly, Chazal tell you that's absolutely not the halacha at all, and it means something totally different from the pshat. The ilav gezerah shava hava mina shem mamish. So you mean to tell me that without the Gzeira Shava to connect it to Ephraim and Menashe, to teach me that the word shame does not give him the actual name of the decedent, but rather that the Yavam inherits the deceased brother, you mean that I would have thought that the word shame means to give him the actual shame? Laman kamazar rachmana liyavam. So Yakum al Shem Achicha miboile. So the Gemara says, but even without the Gzeira Shava, it seems that I could have been able to derive that anyway, because remember, who is the pasuk speaking to, according to the Pashut understanding of the text? Meaning, it says that the firstborn child that she shall give birth to, will be given the name of his brother. It shouldn't be his brother, but rather your brother, because the Torah is speaking to the father of the newborn son. Call him by your brother's name. That would have been the way the Torah should have spoken if it was speaking to the Yavam himself. That it's a commandment on the Yavam to name his son according to the name of his deceased brother. And Ila Beidina Yakum al Shem Achi Aviv Mi Boile. And if the Torah is addressing the Beis Din, which is supervising the case, then the Torah should have said that the Beis Din shall instruct the family that this baby shall be given the name of his deceased uncle, not his deceased brother. So the Gemara says, even without the Gzeira Shava, it seems that there's something awry in the verbiage of the pasuk that doesn't allow you to understand it in simple context. So why do you need the Gzeira Shava to clarify that for you? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Because V'dilma hachi kamer lehu rachmana lebeis din. Maybe the Torah is addressing the Beis Din that is presiding over this law, and it's telling them as follows: Imru le liyavam yakum al shem achiv. That speak to the yavam. The Torah is telling the Beis Din, speak to the father who's the yavam, and tell him when you give this baby a name, give him the name of his brother. That's what they're telling the Beis Din to instruct to the yavam. And therefore the word achiv is appropriate, and maybe that's the way I could have read the pasuk, and that's why you need the Gzeira Shava. Therefore, ela asoy Gzeira Shava afikte legamre. And therefore you need the Gzeira Shava to tell you that this is not the explanation, that's not the way the halacha follows. We don't give the newborn baby the name of the deceased uncle. So now the Gemara says, Hashta de amart kra begadol ksiv, ema bechor liyabim, pashat lo liyabim. So now the Gemara is going to go through a whole different number of lines of questioning.
Sorry, how are we, now we understand it this way, so how is he preserving the name of his brother? The child's not named after it. The brother gets inheritance. Even if he didn't marry the Yovam and there was no children, he would also get the inheritance anyway.
Share it.
So
the way that you preserve the brother is through the mitzvah of Yibum itself. The Ramban explains that the brother is the closest relative to the decedent, and therefore by doing Yibum with his wife, he's acting as a surrogate for his brother to build a family in his brother's stead.
But they're all his children, though.
They're all his children, but there's some spiritual tether to the decedent because he's doing it l'shem his brother. He's doing it as a surrogate for his brother. So therefore there's some attribution to his brother on a spiritual plane. Okay.
I missed that. I didn't quite understand.
The deceased uncle. The baby has a deceased uncle.
Yeah.
The baby.
The mother's first husband.
You get it?
It's his uncle, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
The reason was that it should be a continuance of a child.
The continuance of a child, the brother acts as a surrogate for his deceased brother. He's acting as a surrogate. Okay? So now the Gemara is asking another question. The Gemara is saying, if you're now taking this pasuk out of its simple meaning, I have a question. Maybe you're going too far to take it out of its simple meaning. Remember, because the Torah says, V'hayaha bechor asher teled. And you're telling me that the word bechor is a reference not to the baby, but is a reference to the brother who's the yavam. And from there we learn that the firstborn, the eldest brother, has the mitzvah of yibum. But it doesn't say the eldest, it says the bechor. So therefore, maybe hashta damar kra begadol ksiv ema bechor liyabim pashal lo liyabim. Maybe what the Torah means is that only when there's a firstborn son who's available to do yibum is there a mitzvah of yibum. But maybe if the firstborn son is the one who died and all you have are younger brothers, even if there is an oldest of these remaining brothers, maybe there's no mitzvah of yibum at all. Maybe what the Torah is telling you is the mitzvah of yibum only applies when one of the surviving brothers is a bechor. After all, why did the Torah use the word bechor in the first place? So the Gemara says you could never think that. You know why? Because imkein eishes achiv shalahaya ba'olamo demiet rachman olamali. Because if that were the case, then you wouldn't ever have to exclude eishes achiv shalahaya ba'olamo. Remember, the pasuk's talking about two brothers living, ki yeshvu achim yachdav, and two brothers live together. Now, if you're telling me that there's bichlal no mitzvah of yibum when the firstborn son dies, there's no mitzvah of yibum because whoever's remaining is not a firstborn, then you wouldn't need to exclude a brother that's born after the firstborn dies. He's automatically excluded because he's not a bechor. The very fact that the Torah has to exclude him means that even if a brother that is alive at the time that his brother dies is not a bechor, he has the mitzvah of yibum. So parach ravacha ve'ema limeute buchra de'ima. Not necessarily so. Maybe a firstborn son from the mother would have a mitzvah of yibum if it weren't for the fact that he was born after his brother died. Maybe that's what the Torah is coming to exclude. So hahu lo matzi samart the yibum benachla tolarachmana v'nachla min ha'av v'lo min ha'em. That you would never think, because the whole principle of yibum is linked to the laws of inheritance, because the yavam inherits his brother's estate. And since the laws of inheritance always follow patrilinealism, they never follow the maternal status. Therefore, the very fact that this kid who wasn't born at the time when his brother passed away is a firstborn to his mother is totally irrelevant. It's a paternal concern, not a maternal concern. Ve'ema ki ika b'chor tiskaya mitzvahs yibum, ki laka b'chor lo tiskaya mitzvahs yibum. But maybe another way to explain the pasuk is, like Rashi says, Klomar dilma la'olam b'chor davka. Maybe only a b'chor has a mitzvah of yibum. V'achi kamer rachmana, i'ika b'chor kamach tiskaya mitzvahs yibum. That what the Torah is telling you is, if there's a b'chor who's one of the surviving brothers, there's a mitzvah of yibum. O b'chor, o b'pashut. Either with the firstborn or with one of his younger brothers. But if there's no b'chor that's surviving because the b'chor was the brother who's deceased, maybe bichlal there's no mitzvah of yibum. Why does the Torah have to exclude Eishes Achiv shelo haya ba'olamo? Because when a b'chor is alive, it is possible, if the b'chor were to refuse, to go to the next brother in line, right? And the Torah is just telling you that if it's an Eishes Achiv shelo haya ba'olamo, you can't go to him even when the b'chor refuses. Maybe that's what the Torah is telling you, but you need the existence of a b'chor that's alive in order for the mitzvah of yibum to be extant at all. So the Gemara says, Omar kra umeis achad mehem. Milo askinan demis b'chor v'amar rachmana liyabim katan. So yeah, the explanation is because the pasuk is talking about where there are two brothers, and it says that one of the two brothers dies. So the Torah doesn't designate specifically that the younger brother dies in order for the b'chor to be the surviving brother. So therefore, the fact that the Torah does not discriminate, it is possible for the b'chor to have been deceased, and yet there's still a mitzvah of yibum. So that proves it. Ve'ema demis katan v'amarachmana liyabim b'chor. But no, maybe you could contrive it and say that the Torah is dafka talking about a case where the younger brother died and the b'chor is alive, and only then is there a mitzvah of yibum. But the Gemara says, Hamiyet Rachmana Eishes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo. Yes, but then you go back to the original problem. Since the pasuk is only talking about a case where there are only two brothers, and yet the Torah excludes an Eishes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo, how could you ever have a situation where the younger brother dies and the b'chor survives, and yet there's still an issue of Eishes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo? If the pasuk is talking about where there are only two brothers, and it wants to tell you, in a case of two brothers, there's a mitzvah of yibum, except when the surviving brother was not alive when the brother died, that can't be if the only time there's a mitzvah of yibum is if the surviving brother is a b'chor, because by definition he's going to have been alive because he's older. So therefore, the fact that the Torah has to exclude it explicitly, Eishes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo, teaches me that even when the brother that survives is younger, there's still a mitzvah of yibum. Ve'ema kilaka b'chor kadam katan zacha v'ika b'chor kadam katan lo zacha. The Gemara says maybe there's another way to look at the pasuk. Maybe what the pasuk's telling you is, okay, fine, you've proven to me that the mitzvah of yibum applies even with a non-b'chor, but maybe the only time that a younger brother can fulfill the mitzvah of yibum is only when there's not a b'chor. But maybe when there is a b'chor, then even if the younger brother tries to consummate with the Yevama, his act is an act of znus, and they're not married. It's not a mitzvah of yibum at all. So, and that's what the Torah is telling you. Amar kra ki yeshvu achim yachdav huksha yeshivas achim zelazeh. Answers the Gemara, two brothers live together. And we see that if two brothers live together, the Torah is equating the b'chor to a non-b'chor, and they have exactly equal status. So regardless of whether there's a b'chor or not, the younger brother has the opportunity to do yibum. Ve'ema ki ika b'chor lihader agadol, ki leka b'chor ein chozrin eisel gadol. But maybe another way of looking at the pasuk is that only when there's a b'chor that's a surviving brother is there a mitzvah to give first rights of refusal to the eldest brother. But maybe what the Torah is teaching you is when there's no b'chor, and that's why the Torah uses the term b'chor instead of using the word gadol, when there's no b'chor present, there is no din of giving first rights of refusal to the eldest brother. How do you know? Alama Tanya Abaya Keshisha. Why did Abaya the elder teach us that even when there is no Bechor, you still give first rights of refusal according to chronological age? That he says mitzvah begadol liyabim, that it's the mitzvah for the eldest brother to do yibum, lo ratza holchem etzel achiv hakatan. And if he refuses, the first surviving brother refuses, you go to the next oldest brother. And if he refuses, then you go to the next oldest brother. So you basically see that there is a hierarchy based on age, even when you're dealing with a non-bechor. So lo ratza chozun etzel gadol. And if all of them refuse, you go back to the eldest brother and either convince him to do yibum or have him do chalitza. So you see from here that even when there are multiple brothers and these brothers going down in the ladder are not bechors, you still have to go according to chronological age. And how do you know that? You don't necessarily see that. Maybe the pasuk uses the word bechor to tell me that you only go according to age when there's a bechor. But if there's no bechor, there's no reason to go according to age. So the Gemara answers kibechor. Ma bechor becharaso garmalo, af gadol gidulaso garmalo. Answers the Gemara, the reason why the Torah, that's exactly why the Torah uses the word bechor. The Torah uses the word bechor, even though it's talking about a non-bechor as well that has a mitzvah of yibum, to tell you that just like a bechor has special status, so too does an older brother have special status. Meaning that just like a bechor gets a double portion, so too does any brother who's chronologically older than his older brothers have a special advantage over his younger brothers. And that's precisely why the Torah uses the word bechor and not gadol, to teach you that any brother who is older has a first rights of refusal over a younger brother. Ve'ema ki miyabein bechor lishkol nachala, ki miyabein pasha lo lishkol nachala. But maybe, says the Gemara, there's another way to look at the pasuk. Maybe when the Torah says the word bechor, it's telling you, dafka when the bechor does yibum, does he get the estate of his deceased brother. But when a non-bechor does yibum, he fulfills the mitzvah of yibum, but he doesn't get the estate of his deceased brother. Maybe that's a way of looking at it, because only by a bechor does it say yakum al shem achiv, does he receive his brother's inheritance. So therefore, Amar Kra, yakum al shem achiv v'harei kam. So the Torah says yakum al shem achiv, that he shall replace his brother. So it says he shall replace his brother, and v'harei kam, because the Torah links the mitzvah of yibum to the mitzvah of getting his inheritance. So if he's yakum al shem achiv, meaning that he's replacing his brother by building his home, by marrying his widow, then he automatically is entitled to the mitzvah of nachala. So the Gemara then says finally, Ve'ela bechor dekarya rachmana, l'mai hilchisa. So now that we finally exhausted all of these discussions, our question therefore is, the Torah could have used the word gadol, and it would have been much more straightforward. Why then does the Torah choose to use the word bechor, which leads us to all these misleading possibilities, if the Torah could have said it much more straightforward and said, V'haya hagadol asher teled, that whichever brother is older has the mitzvah of yibum first, that he gets the inheritance. Answers the Gemara Ligreyusa. It's telling me that it's a limitation on the rights of the yavam. Ma bechor enonotel beroy kebemochsak, avhai enonotel beroy kebemochsak. It's telling me the basic halacha that links the yavam to a bechor. When we say that a bechor gets a double portion of his father's estate, that's only of the value of the estate at the time of the death of the father. But let's say 6 months after the father dies, before we had a chance to divvy up the estate, the stock market rose, the real estate market rose, and the value of the estate is much higher than it was than the time of the death of the father. The bechor only gets the double portion of what the estate was worth at the time of death, not at the time of the division of the estate. Mm-hmm. And that halacha is also true by a yavam. When we say that the yavam inherits his brother's assets, it's only that he gets his brother's assets based on their value at the time of death. And the way Rashi understands it is, let's say the father dies after the guy does yibum. And so the guy after the brother does yibum for his deceased brother, and then their father passes away. So he can say, well, listen, I get my portion, and I get my deceased brother's portion of our father's estate. So we say to him, no, you only get the value of what our brother would have gotten at the time of his death if the division of the estate would have taken place at that time. But let's say it's 10 years later and the value of our father's estate has gone up so much in value, we still only give you the value, that portion of what the father's estate, of the brother's portion of the father's estate would have been worth at the time that the brother died.
What happens if it goes down?
That's a good question.
What if it's a debt? I mean,
Why wouldn't it be the same thing?
does he take?
Eino notel beroi ki b'muchzak. I'm not sure if it's the same halacha when it goes down in value. I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know.
And if the brother dies with and he's in debt, does the Yavam take on the?
Does he have to assume the debts? That's a good question also. The Gemara hasn't discussed that. Okay. Next Mishnah. This Mishnah does not relate directly to the mitzvah of Yibum, but it is related in the sense that it has to deal with situations where you're not allowed to complete a marriage. Hanitan al hashivcha v'nishtachrira, o al ha'ovedes kolcha v'miniskayira, Raizel lo yichnos v'imkanas ein motziin miyada. Here's the following case. This is very, very practical applications in halacha today. A man is rumored to be having a live-in girlfriend who's not Jewish. There's a rumor in the community. Yankel is living with Christina. Okay? And then, lo and behold, Christina converts to Judaism. The halacha is that Yankel is not allowed to marry Christina because of the rumor. But if he does, v'di'evid, we let him stay married to her. It's maisim b'chol yom.
That's like a knas type of thing?
You'll see. The Gemara is going to ask the question. Now, the next case is hanitan al eishes ish v'hotzi'uha mitachas yado afal pisha konas yotzi. The next case is Yankel is rumored to be having an adulterous affair with Rachel, who's a married woman. In that situation, the Beis Din will say, based on the rumor, we're sorry, Rachel, you have to divorce your husband, because there's this rumor. And in that situation, not only is it usher for Yankel to marry her after her divorce, but even if he marries her illicitly, we force him to divorce her. In other words, you're not allowed to be married to her according to halacha. The Gemara explains in Maseches Sota is that when a woman is an adulteress, she's forbidden to both her husband and to her adulterer. And therefore, this is a forbidden marriage. The Gemara now says, Ha-gioris miha-havya. Let's go back to the case of the Reisha. You said that if Christina ends up converting, Yankel's not allowed to marry her. But no one's questioning the status of her conversion. She's still a valid convert. The Urimini, let's raise a contradiction. Echad isha nisgayer l'shum isha, ve'echad isha shenisgayer l'shum ish, v'chein mi shenisgayer l'shum shulchan melachim l'shum avdei shlamo, enam gerim, divrei Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Nechemia is of the opinion that if a Gentile converts for ulterior motives, either because they fall in love with someone, or because they can get rich, or because of prestige like the servants of Shlomo, if they do it for ulterior motives, their conversion is not valid. Shahaya Rabbi Nechemia Omer, Echad Gerei Arayos, Ve'echad Gerei Chalomos, Ve'echad Gerei Mordechai Ve'Esther, Einan Gerim, Achi Yizgayeru Bizman Hazeh. Because Rabbi Nechemia had a statement. His statement was that regardless of whether a person converted through Gerei Arayos, which was an actual event that happens in Sefer Melachim, where God sends lions against a certain population, a Gentile population in Eretz Yisrael, and they're so fearful of the lions that they convert to Judaism. Or if a person has a chalom, a Gentile has a dream, where someone visits him in a dream and says, convert. Or the people who converted in the times of Mordechai and Esther, because the Torah says, V'rabim me'amei ha'aretz, misyahadim ki nafal pachad ha'yehudim aleihem, that many of the Persian Gentiles converted to Judaism because they were intimidated by the power of the Jews at the time. So in all of those cases, though their conversions are not valid conversions until they convert today. So the Gemara says, what does that mean they convert today? These are talking, Bizman hazeh sal gadaitach. What does that mean? These people lived historically in the past. How can they convert today? They're not alive anymore. Ela ema kibizman hazeh. What we mean to say is that they have to convert as if they were living in times like we are in Golos today, where the Jews don't have power. If you would have been willing to convert, even when there are no ulterior motives, then your conversion is valid. But if you're only converting because of the prestige or the intimidation of the Jewish people, then your conversion is not valid. So the Gemara says, how can you tell me that her conversion is valid if Christine is only converting so that she can be with Yankel? So the Gemara answers, Ha'itmar Allah Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta mishmei derav halacha kedivrei ha'omer kulam geirim hei. We don't paskin like Rabbi Nechemia. We paskin that b'di'evet, even though she converted for ulterior motives, the gerus is still valid, and that's actually how we paskin, and that's why it's wrong to ever question a person's conversion, even if you can ascertain that they taka did convert for ulterior motives. B'di'evet, the gerus is still a good gerus. So the Gemara says, "Ihachi lechatchila nami." So if that's the case, Shlomi asked the question, well then what's wrong with Yankel marrying Christina? She's a valid convert. The Gemara says, Mishum de Rebbe Asi, Damar Rav Asi, Haser Mimcha, Ikshus Pevel Azus Fasayim V'goymer. Because the Pasuk in Mishlei says that you have an obligation to remove from you all negative rumors. And because there's a rumor that Yankel was living with Christina before, if he were to marry her, that would only corroborate the rumor and cause people to have bad thoughts about Yankel, and that's why we tell him, do not marry Christina.
It may not be true.
It may not be true. However, you have an obligation to distance rumors from yourself. And therefore, if the optics are that you're marrying her because you were involved with her previously, we don't allow you to marry her. But, b'di'evet, if you did marry her, we don't say a word. We don't say anything. We don't force you to divorce her. Okay, and this happens. This has happened, and it continues to happen all the time.
Is there a time limit? Or?
No, we'll see, but there are certain other mitigating circumstances. Tana Rabbanan, Ein Makablim Germ Limos HaMashiach. The Brisa now tells us, related to this, that when Mashiach comes, we're not going to accept converts because we're going to fear that they have ulterior motives. So tell all your Gentile friends, time's running out. You better chaperein if you want to become part of our people. Kayotze bo, better tell Glenn Beck, he's only got a limited amount of time before he converts to Judaism. Kayotze bo lo kiblu gerim lo bimei David v'lo bimei Shlomo. Similarly, we say that they didn't accept gerim in the times of David and Shlomo. Amar Rabbi Eliezer Mikra, what's the pasuk to demonstrate that only converts who convert at times when there are no ulterior motives are accepted? The pasuk says in Yeshaya, Hein gor yagur efes meosi migori tachalayach yipol. The pasuk says, a beautiful pasuk, it says, only those who have zero fear of me, and they still convert, because they convert out of love of Hashem, only those people shall dwell with you, the Jewish people, in the future world. But if a person is converting because he's fearful, because he is scared about the repercussions of not being part of the Jewish people, because it's the Messianic age, sorry, too late. Aval idach lo, anyone else is not welcome. Next, hanitan aleishis ish v'chulei. If a man is rumored to having an adulterous affair with a married woman, Amar Rav uve'edim. That which we said, Rav tells us a very important qualification of our Mishnah. That which we said, that if Yankel ends up marrying Rachel, the woman who was previously married, after it's been rumored that they had an affair, the only time that we obligate him to divorce her is only if there are witnesses that they actually had an affair. But if there are no witnesses and he goes ahead and marries her, we don't force him to divorce her.
And Isra also?
No, just witnesses. It's mashma, just witnesses. Hasra is only to punish a person. Eidim is in order to be able to demonstrate that a person has actually done the act.
That's not a rumor.
Right. That's what Rav is
You
saying.
hear stories like this, right? And unfortunately, someone's marrying them. Like that Rav who married them, I guess should not have married them.
Perhaps. Okay.
Based on this.
Right. Amar of Sheshis. You have to look in the poskim. There are many different mitigating circumstances. Amar of Sheshis, Amina Kinayim v'Shachev Rav, Amar Lahai Shmaitza. So Rav Sheshis respectfully disagrees with Rav, and he says, as out of respect, I believe Rav was dozing off when he made that statement, because otherwise he couldn't have possibly said that. Detanya, because the Brisa explicitly states, Hanitan aleishis ish v'hotziuha al yado v'niskar shemitachas yidei acher, that in a situation where a woman, Rachel, is rumored to have committed adultery, and therefore the Beis Din forced her to get divorced, and then she went ahead and married a third man, not the accused adulterer. She marries Moshe, right? And then Moshe divorces her. Then imkanas lo yotzi. Only in that circumstance, if Yankel goes ahead and marries her after she was married to a third man, we don't obligate him to divorce her. So heichi dami. So now what's the case? Ig diika edim. So if you're going to tell me, like you say, Rav, that the only time that we force a woman to divorce the accused adulterers if there are witnesses, so ki asa acher ve'afsake lakala mai havi. So then what difference does it make if there's a third person that married her in the interim or not? If there are mamish witnesses that this woman committed adultery with this man, then it's irrelevant whether there was a third man who married her in the interim. The only benefit of a third man marrying her in the interim is to remove the rumor, to dispel the rumor. But if it's not a rumor, but it's actually corroborated by witnesses, it shouldn't make a halachic difference. So elolav deleka edim v'tayma da'asa acher va'afseke lakala halav hachim avkina. So you see very clearly from this brisa that even when it's only a rumor, we say the halacha as follows. When a third man married her in the interim, and therefore he's interrupted the rumor, he's sort of dispelled the rumor because she didn't go ahead right away and marry her accused adulterer, then we say that if the rumored adulterer goes ahead afterwards and married her after the third man divorces her, we say that they're allowed to remain married. But if he goes ahead and directly marries her, because of the strength of the rumor, we force them to get divorced. So it can't be like you're saying, Rav, that there have to be Adam. You see from here that even when there are no witnesses, we force them to get divorced. So Amar Rav, so Rav says, no, you're misreading the brisa. Hu hadin da'afal gav delo asa acher ve'afseke lakala iika edem afkinan eleka edem lo mafkinan. So the Gemara says no. Really, in reality, the halacha is going to be that only when there are witnesses do we ever force a couple to get divorced. If there's rumors of adultery, there have to be actual witnesses. What are you going to say? What about the brisa? So v'hachi kamer da'afal gav da'asa acher va'afseke lakala lechatchila lo yichnos. All the brisa is telling you is, even though a third man married her in the interim and then divorced her, there's still an isser lechatchila for the rumored adulterer to go ahead and marry her. And it's only b'di'evid, if he does marry her, that b'di'evid we allow them to stay married. That's the point of the brisa. It's a chiddush is, don't think that now that there's a third man who married her and divorced her, that even lechatchila it's mutter. No, it's still lechatchila usser, it's only b'di'evid that they're allowed to stay married. So meisvei. Let me bring you another brisa. B'amed dvar mamurim kishein labanim, avol yesh labanim lo seitze. But the brisa says the only time we force them to get divorced is if there's no children from her first husband. But if there are children from her first husband and the rumored adulterer marries her, we do not force them to get divorced. You know why? Because if we were to force them to get divorced, that would confirm the rumors that she committed adultery during her first marriage, and that would cast aspersions on her children as being mamzerim. And that we don't want to do. It's only if there are actual witnesses, then we force her to get divorced. So you see that what? So you see very clearly that the only time that witnesses are a factor is only when there are children. But if there are no children, even without witnesses, we force her to get divorced from the man. So according to you, Rav, you didn't qualify it, whether there are children or not. You're saying that the only time we force her to divorce the rumored adulterer is when there are witnesses. But if there are no witnesses, we never force her to get divorced. But that's disproved by this brisa. The brisa only says that that's only true when there are children involved. But if there are no children involved, we force her to get divorced, even when it's only a rumor. So the Gemara says, Rav mukila lamasnisin v'yesh labanim v'yesh la'edim. So the Rav says, okay, I agree with you. If there are no children and it's only a rumor, we do not force her to get divorced. What I said is when there are children. When there are children, and only when there are witnesses is she obligated to get divorced. And that's what our mission is talking about. So the Gemara says, Umay duchke derav le'ukme lamasnisin v'yesh labanim v'yesh la'edim v'tayma dika edem mafkinan v'lak edem lo mafkinan lukma b'shein labanim afagav deleka edem. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, what forced Rav to say that that's what our mission is talking about? That dafka when there are Edom, is he forced to divorce her, but if there are no Edom, he's not. Because what? Because we're talking about a case where there are children. Let him say that our Mishnah is talking about where there are no witnesses and there are no children. Which Rav said the language of the Mishnah itself proves to me that we must be talking about a case where there are witnesses. Why? Because Ma'ir Yidatani Hotzi Uha, Lisni Hotzia, Ela Kol Hotzi Uha Bevestin, Uvestin Be'edim Hudamafki, and the only, because the Mishnah said that the Beis Din forced this woman to get divorced from her first husband. Now, how could Beis Din force a woman to divorce her husband unless there are Edom? If it's just a rumor, the Beis Din is not going to force her to get divorced. So therefore, the very language of the Mishnah implies that there are witnesses who have testified that there was an affair. And it's on that basis that Rav says that that's why we force her to divorce her Yankel, the accused adulterer, because there were witnesses. And according to this brisa, the Mishnah must be talking about a case where there are children involved, and that's the only reason why there have to be witnesses in order for us to force them to get divorced. I'll give you another answer. Rav, in defense of Rav. Rav is saying that even when there are not children, if there are no witnesses, we don't force them to get divorced. And Hani Masni Yasa Rebbe. And that brisa that says that we force a woman to get divorced even based on a rumor when there are no children involved, that does not go according to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that an unsubstantiated rumor is not grounds for divorce. But Rebbe disagrees with our Mishnah. Rebbe says even an unsubstantiated rumor, even a rumor that's based on circumstantial evidence, is enough of a reason to coerce a woman to divorce her husband. And where do you see that? The Tanya, Rochel Yotze v'isha chogeres b'sinar, Amar Rebbe holam uchura davar teitze. If there's only circumstantial evidence, a man walks into his house and he sees the traveling salesman walking out of the house. The vacuum cleaner salesman is walking out of his house, and comes in and he sees his wife fixing her leotards. Okay? And the only time that she would ever be doing that is if she had previously taken them off. So he sees her adjusting her pantaloons. This is a sign, this circumstantial evidence that she has just been intimate with another man, and therefore that's grounds for divorce. And similarly, if the man comes home and he sees the traveling salesman walk out of the door, and then he looks at the canopy above his bed and he sees that there's saliva on it, this is a sign that his wife was lying on her back, and therefore this is grounds for divorce. Okay, and the third case is min alayim hafuchim tachas hamita amar Rebbe holu mechur hadavar teitze. And if there are backward shoes, meaning a guy sees shoes under his bed that are arranged in a way that are normally not arranged the way he arranges his shoes, that's also a sign that someone else has been here by his bed, and that's circumstantial evidence to divorce the wife. So the Gemara says, I don't understand this last case. Min alayim hafuchim lechse demaninu. If you see the shoes, just see if they're your shoes or not. If they're not your shoes, then you know, and if they are your shoes, then it's not. Then you don't have any grounds. So elamakom in alayim hafuchim tachas amita amar Rebbe holam mechura davar teitze. But rather, what it means is that you see in the dust a footprints of shoes. And you see that the way that the footprints are configured is that it's not the way that you normally store your shoes under your bed. And that is in itself circumstantial evidence to say that since you saw the traveling salesman coming out of the room and you saw footprints that are not normal, the way you would normally put your shoes under the bed, that the traveling salesman had an affair with your wife, and that's grounds for divorce. But the Chachamim disagree with that. The Chachamim say, unless you have actual edus, you don't have grounds to divorce the wife, and you can't. The Beis Din cannot force a man to divorce his wife. Have a wonderful day.